Records from the earliest times show mankind in what seems a ceaseless state of war. Without exception, all the great empires were built on endless battles. Persians, Romans, Vikings, Mongols, Moguls. And in contemporary times, the Europeans built their power through conflict. We name monuments after great battles won. The rulers we revere were also successful at war. Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Churchill. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, so is conflict the natural state of affairs for mankind? Wars, Mao Zedong wrote, will last as long as heaven and earth. During the Cold War, a world lived in fear of nuclear annihilation as the superpowers squared up to each other. Nuclear conflagration between superpowers has been avoided, but conflict still stalks our world. 50 million people have died in the wars of the previous half-century. That's as many as in the 2 world wars. Many millions more have died from the side effects of war: starvation, HIV/AIDS, landmines, disease. Battles are not fought anymore by armies on battlefields. Since 1945, 9 out of 10 conflicts have been civil conflicts, and all are fought in poor countries. This is the era of the roadside bomb. Apparently secure within their frontiers, the rich nations are at peace. Even though some rich countries experience the same religious and ethnic tensions within their borders, there is no civil conflict. Why not? This Oxford professor is the author of a recently published study on the reasons why nearly all modern conflict is civil and restricted to the developing world. It is, says Paul Collier, because development has failed.
Maybe human nature is to disagree with each other. We don't necessarily all love each other, right? But the phenomenon of large-scale, organized, violent killing, that is relatively rare. It doesn't happen in most societies, and it's confined to this rather small group of countries at the bottom of the world economic system.
Collier argues elites use brutality to keep control over the resources. Diamonds, drugs, hardwoods. The rich world has an insatiable appetite for. To this minority, it's in their best interest to keep their countries backward, recruiting child soldiers, indoctrinating young men with suicide cults. It makes escaping from poverty and ignorance even more difficult. To most people most of the time in the developed economies, these wars go virtually unnoticed because they appear not to affect them. But terrorism is leading to a rethink. Extremism, illicit drugs, the sex trade and illegal immigration are all associated with wars that all the military muscle in the world cannot contain. So if war is not to be taken as inevitable, how is the world to deal with conflict in the 21st century? Is investment in development, not arms, the only way to get true security? In this program, we travel to the zones of civil conflict to see if this modern analysis of war and peace stands up.
It was the consequences of failed states such as Afghanistan that 9/11 occurred.
Conflict causes poverty, poverty causes conflict.
These groups are funded from the drug business, and as long as we try to contain cocaine growing, they will try to grow them in neighboring countries. So this is a regional menace.
The people who die in civil wars are overwhelmingly not people who die in the fighting. They die from the diseases and the disruption that are a byproduct of civil war.
Politicians do not want to act until events become real tragedies.
I would like to become an engineer because during the past 24 years my country was destroyed and I would like to rebuild my country.
As a result of this fighting, we didn't know how to live. We didn't know the meaning of life.
The British Empire stopped here. The Afghans defeated the European imperialists and built a monument to celebrate. But at the end of the 19th century, the British were only the latest in a long line of invaders. In the 1970s, it was the Russians. Then came the Taliban, a mix of homegrown and foreign Islamic hardliners. And now NATO. Will ancestral and religious hatreds always make Afghanistan a cockpit for war? Without 9/11, the Taliban would probably still be in charge.
What happened in this country on September 11th, the United States, there was clearly, these were people who came from conflict-affected parts of the world and felt that they wanted to take their conflict to this country.
During the Cold War, Afghanistan became a proxy battleground for the superpowers. When the Russians were defeated, the Taliban carried on a civil war with the Northern Alliance.
Some people say, well, Afghanistan was ruined by the civil war with the Soviet Union. Some people say Afghanistan was ruined by the Taliban. Some people say that the recent war has left Afghanistan in continuing crisis. But the point is, before all of that turmoil, Afghanistan was impoverished. And like impoverished countries anywhere, when a country just at the bottom of the income standards, with extreme poverty, with economic isolation, the chances for violence, whether it's coups or Soviet intervention or the Taliban or a subsequent war after 9/11, whatever it is, impoverished places are much more likely to experience this kind of conflict.
By the mid-1990s, all traces of modernity had been exterminated. Afghanistan had become a bandit state where only extremist Islam and the opium warlords could thrive. NATO forces helped topple the Taliban. This is not so much ground zero as nation zero. Everything is starting from scratch. In October 2004, Afghanistan held its first presidential elections. Schools are being rebuilt and classes are restarting. Under the Taliban, women were banned from learning. These are still the fortunate few, middle-class girls who see a future beyond the cotton grill of a burqa.
It's very important for everyone that they must study.
We would like to have peace and security in our country and get our education normally. I would like to become an engineer because during the past 24 years my country was destroyed and I would like to rebuild my country.